Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 144th edition of the Frank and Stan chat. And for those of you watching on video, you will notice that we have a guest, and it's Adrian Gray, who's been a guest here before. Hello, Adrian.
Good morning, Frank.
Hello, yes, and Stan, I think caught out by the fact that we're doing this recording a day early.
Yeah. Well, you know, my diary in my head only has yesterday, today, and tomorrow. So if you're going to change things in advance, it doesn't work.
Now,
I can't remember yesterday.
For those of you who have seen Adrian on Frank and Stan chat before, it would be interesting for Adrian just to remind everybody how we know each other and the sort of work you do at the moment. So could you do that for us?
Oh gosh, Frank and I used to work together in the land of Mordor, didn't we, Frank?
So that was working for Adrian. Had a very senior role in Ofsted when I was there as well. So and what was that, Adrian? Well, I don't think we worked together, and at times you were very challenging towards the work that I was leading on. But what was it that you were involved in?
Well, we had I had various roles in Ofsted, but actually I started off in what used to be called the school improvement team, where we spent all the term in schools that had already failed their inspections. It actually was a fascinating piece of work. But I ended up, we had a team called Challenge and Analysis. And actually what I wanted to do was to call it Challenge Investigation and Analysis, and hope that nobody noticed the acronym, but somebody spotted that. But our role was to yeah, you didn't know that one.
No, I didn't know that.
Our role was to do the internal evaluation of Ofsted. So we'd look at things like, there's a new children's home framework come out. How effective is it? So we'll do that. And also we used to do investigations into particular issues, gather intelligence on various issues that were of interest. And I'll give an example, because actually it was a fascinating one, but it never got published at the time. But Ofsted used to get frequent complaints from junior schools that they were being disadvantaged by infant schools inflating their Key Stage 1 assessments. And I can remember sitting at home thinking, well, how the heck can we get an answer to this one? So we had a bright idea, which was we'd investigate what happened when infant and junior schools merged. It was a great idea, because it actually produced the data which proved absolutely conclusively that infant schools pushed their data up, and the summer before they merged with the junior school, the data went down. And that was the case in 24 out of 25 mergers. That actually proved too controversial. We weren't allowed to publish it. So,
I also remember you going around the office saying about schools that are at the coastal schools. I remember you coming around, you'd done some research to say that this was an area that, you know, it hadn't actually been picked up before. I remember you sort of unpicking that for us, and then me thinking about, well, how the hell am I going to, you know, what do we do about that? You know, it felt to me as if the evidence was there, but actually nobody had actually collated it in that way before. Nobody had ever looked at it in that way.
Well, I used a bit of I'm a historian and a geographer by background, so I used a bit of my geography, and we thought, well, let's pick an area on the coast and see what we can find out about it. And we picked Hastings, and the result was that Sir Michael Wiltshire got quite excited about Hastings, if you remember, Frank. And I think even somebody asked a question as to why people were bullying Hastings anymore. But what was fascinating there was we found that there were schools which had a long history of struggle, and that really helped to inform my view of failing schools, which is that there are two categories. There's ones we call epidemic and there's endemic. And the epidemic ones are effective, usually perhaps a small village school where the head has gone off on a tangent about something or other, and it all blows up and then quickly recovers. or you've got endemic schools where there are underlying significant problems that frequently overwhelm the leadership. And we've got those early academies that failed, for example, and then were rebadged and failed again. Those sorts of things, and they need different approaches.
Yeah, I agree. I mean,
that's really interesting, because I remember as a head that there were schools not far from where I was that should have been good schools at least, and yet 3 headships into it and it was still the same struggling school, and it's almost the same now.
yeah,
25 years later.
Yes.
yeah, yeah.
Well,
And it's not got a poor catchment area.
Well, I mean, that's been an interesting one, but what we found was the endemic schools were places like Hastings, where they had trouble recruiting good teachers, for example, or they were I mean, I've got an academy not very far from me, which has gone through various identity crises, and it's the other school in the town with a selective school.
Yeah.
So it's always the one that people don't want to go to and teachers don't want to work at so much.
So
those are underlying problems that need different solutions. You can't keep failing it every time.
And it's as if sometimes, I mean, I'm thinking you've triggered something in my mind, because I was, I won't say this, the academy, but there's an academy that I know of that only has about 20% of its kids actually who start in year 7 get to year 11. Is and areas like Hastings face those sorts of challenges as well. That sort of high mobility. Some kids will come in for 1 year, they disappear for a year, then come back a year later, and it's those sorts of things we were talking before about. Clearly that is a key factor for that academy in managing itself and improving. But actually, when you read the reports, and the countless Ofsted reports of this particular school, there's hardly any reference to those sorts of challenges, which actually contextually is quite important to understand the challenges they're facing. And actually just saying to the school again, well, it's still not a good school. It's just throwing money at something which actually the problem is sitting there, but nobody wants to talk about it. You
remember the school on the army base, Frank?
Yeah.
That had no children. No children were there for their entire life, so that the Key Stage 2 SATs had no relevance whatsoever to the Key Stage 1s.
Yeah.
Because they were an entirely different school.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Well, we could. Anyway, that's what Adrian used to do, and as you can see, it evokes quite a lot of discussion, and it was a very. I mean, I have to say, in my career, it was one of the most exciting periods of my working life, working with Adrian and having
I'll pay
to.
you later, Frank.
No, well, it's that interesting bit, as you were saying, that sometimes your organisations need to be open to these sorts of internal challenges, because if they're not, then external challenges will come and they won't be ready for them. It's part of that sort of culture of intrigue and of examination and that sort of stuff, which I think I think Ofsted perhaps wasn't always keen on that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and I think there's sort of an organisational life cycle that you see things go through. Like if you think about some of our big retailers, for example, I can remember when Sainsbury's were sort of the sort of lead fashionable supermarket, and then they got to a stage where they became a bit smug, and they lost market share. And the same with Marks and Spencer's, for example. They were everybody's high street shop. A whole generation went there, and they didn't actually question themselves enough. And everybody has to question themselves, otherwise they atrophy, I suppose.
Yeah.
Why self-evaluation is so important. It's not Ofsted self-evaluate. I don't think so, really.
No. Okay, John Lewis is another example, isn't it? Quite topical.
Well, yeah, that's it.
Okay. Right, Adrian, what's caught your eye this week?
Well, the most recent thing I've done an update on my investigation into what primary deep dives are going on. And this is something that Ofsted tells me they don't investigate anymore because it's not interesting to them, which is surprising, you might say. And people who follow me on LinkedIn will know that in the past I've been fascinated by the fact that, well, the third most important subject in the country, according to Ofsted Deep Dives, has been history. And a strangely high proportion of primary deep dives have been into history. So that last July I looked at this, and it was reading and maths at the top, obviously, and then history well ahead of anything else. So I've just had another look to see whether that's changed in the latest batch of reports published. And, well, it's changed a little bit, but not that much. So it's still the case that history is the third most popular subject to get a visit. And you might think, well, perhaps science is up there behind it, because after all, science is quite important. Would you say science is important, Frank?
I think I would say science was quite important. Bearing in mind, how important it is when students progress into secondary education, and history doesn't appear to be quite so important. Adrian doesn't have quite the same prominence.
Enough to have some SATs in it. Do you remember those?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
They abolished those. And what happened? Well, according to Ofsted Primary Deep Dive, science is now the 7th most important subject.
I don't know why I'm laughing. It's the lack of thinking about how all this is meant to join up. I mean, if we have business leaders here talking to us now, listening to us, they'll be thinking, hang on a minute, you mean to say the inspectorate that goes into all schools is not encouraging schools to give greater prominence to things like design technology? Because what's the situation for design technology then in primary schools, Adrian? Have we had any?
Almost off the bottom, Frank. Almost off the bottom. Hardly. I looked at 98 recent primary inspections, and I think one or possibly two were in design technology. But on the other hand, the 4th most popular subject was art. So can you find a rational reason why art should have vastly more deep dives than DT?
No.
Off the top of my head, Adrian, like history, is it something that when you think knowledge is the key thing to learning, that something like history and art have a fairly easy list of knowledge you could check? Does that work?
That's an interesting view, Stan.
That's a bit. Actually, that's a red rag to a bull. That saying that to a historian, Stan.
No, he knows. He knows.
I know that, but I'm talking about an inspector who has to make a choice on what they're going to deep dive in. I'm not talking about a historian who would do it in a very different way.
Yeah.
I'm talking about.
I would describe these as soft entry subjects.
Yeah.
And I remember somebody talking to me about this before, that they appear to be relatively accessible compared to computing, languages, or tech design technology, which you might think, I need to know a bit more about that. So
where's music on the list? Where's music on the list?
Well, music actually it's higher, but only by sort of 1 or 2. So and it hasn't improved. So art has been the big increase, a little bit into geography, but I think they appear more technical, these subjects. And also, is it that schools think that therefore they're better at it as well? Because you've got to remember, these primary schools are not experts. And there's a real big question about whether this is deliverable in small primary schools.
Yeah, I mean, you've done a lot of work, haven't you, with regard to small primary schools? I mean, I think when we spoke last time, you were sort of fairly critical of the way this framework appeared to expect there to be subject leaders in all settings. And in fact, I'm hearing of that in some nursery schools.
Yeah, I've told you that last week, Frank. So the subject lead in nursery.
So, I mean, is there any further insight that you can offer with regard to small schools and whether Ofsted said they were going to train, they're going to train their inspectors to better understand, the particular issues around small schools, but is there a better story to tell, do you think?
Well, I did hear that they'd set up a small schools working party, but I've not seen any evidence that it's had any effect. And certainly up until the last lot of management information came out a couple of months ago, we were still in the situation. Well, let me ask a standard question: how many schools of under 100 pupils do you think are being graded outstanding under the current framework stamp?
I would think not very many, because they can't achieve it virtually because of the nature of the school. And I know I was talking.
Thousands of inspections. Have a guess how many?
Go on, Stan.
Well, you'd want it to be about 10%, wouldn't you? Between 5 and 10%.
Well, sadly, there's only ever been one school, and that had 99 pupils. So that barely counts. So if you're under 100, you've got no chance.
No chance.
Well, I used to support a school that had 32 children in the whole school, and one head and one teacher. So presumably both those had to have subject knowledge of every subject and know that the other one was also teaching those subjects in the right. We used to say
good.
Simple things like appraisal in those schools. When appraisal came in and we were, heads were told you go and do observations and you're hard on people. I used to say, in a 2-teacher school, you appraise the other person and you're hard on them and tell them they're not doing good. And then you have to say, can I have my lift home as usual? Because
do you fancy
all schools don't work like yeah. Let's go and sit in the staff room now and have our coffee.
Well, I went to a small school a few years ago where there was a relatively new head, and she said to me, she said, when I came to this school, the 2 teachers had been there for 5 years and they hadn't spoken to each other for 2 years.
I was telling Frank about an amalgamation that we did of 2 very small schools, one with probably 50 children in, one with 30. And the head had agreed to cover both schools. Wasn't quite an executive head yet. We weren't at that stage, but was going to cover 2 schools. So the finance team rang him up to say it'd be a cut in salary for him because one of the 2 schools was a smaller school than his. so therefore, the fact he was taking on another school would mean a cut in salary.
I mean, one of the things, Adrian, I don't know if you want to talk about this, but also you've put a few FOI requests into Ofsted, haven't you?
Oh well, I think everybody should, because it's entertaining. You don't always get a very entertaining reply, unfortunately. I mean, I've been doing one of my sort of sit-at-home jobs is school website reviews for a particular local authority, which is one of those things where you think, oh, this doesn't sound very exciting, but when you get into it, you start to notice things, you see. And I was particularly interested that there is a requirement on schools under the Equality Act to publish an annual equality, almost a sort of commentary, really. It's a report on your compliance. And what I noticed in the schools that I was looking at was that hardly anybody ever does. They all publish a policy, and some of them, but not all, publish objectives, which are also a statutory requirement. But hardly any of them ever published one of these reports, which is meant to be factual and talking about how you're doing, sort of self-evaluation. So I got quite interested in this, and I noticed in the Ofsted their latest stuff on their equality objectives, and I'll read it to you. Objective 1, we will assess the extent to which education providers comply with the relevant legal duties as set out in the Equality Act. So what does that mean? Well, surely it means that they must be checking whether schools are doing what the Equality Act says, including this. So what I then thought, well, I'll have a look, because compliance checking is quite a topical issue lately, isn't it?
It is. Well, there is this thing, isn't it? Just to say, Adrian, that some software was, there is some software, I was not aware of this until a couple of weeks ago, that triggers an alert to schools when people like you go onto a page of a website which normally nobody looks at, and so that therefore becomes a trigger that is a possible Ofsted inspection looming. But actually, it might just mean that it's Adrian Gray showing some interest in your website.
Well, Frank, to make it even worse, it leaves a trail with the word Ofsted in it.
Oh, does it?
Because they log in from Ofsted.
So it's not Adrian Gray.
From Ofsted, so
No,
it's not
but-
because bad. So I mean, what I then thought was, well, I'll have a look at some outstanding schools, and I've done this twice now. And in my last lot, I looked at 16 schools that have been judged outstanding, and I thought, well, let's see whether they meet equalities legislation. So you go on the website, and of these 16, it's another guess for Stan. How many do you think, Stan, publish an equalities annual?
I love
review?
this. Keep going, Adrian, with the guesses for Stan.
I would say probably none.
None is the correct, answer. None of them did. Now, actually, some schools do, and I have found some examples of schools around the country that do publish very good ones. So clearly, people do know about it out there in the system. But of these outstanding schools, including top grammar schools, shall we say, none of them published a compliant report, and indeed, 2 or 3 didn't even publish their objectives,
Right.
which pretty well everybody knows you've got to have. There's also some that simply have a link to their trust site. I'm not sure whether that is legally acceptable or not, because the school is a separate school. It's not actually
because it's inspected under the unique reference number rather than the trust.
Adrian, is there a statutory duty to have a website?
No, there is a little caveat about what you must do if you've not got a website, but you can actually place your stuff on somebody else's website. But I'm not aware of a school that hasn't got a website, but they may.
No, I've just often thought that sometimes they issue diktats of you must, you will, without understanding that actually beyond that there's no requirement to do it.
Well, this is a should. This is a should, which means that you've got to have a good reason not to do it. And I don't believe that a huge proportion of our outstanding schools have got no reason for taking this seriously.
So you submitted an FOI request to Ofsted around this issue.
So I asked Ofsted what they know about it, and guess what they said? They don't know anything. They don't know anything. They said we can't search our reports for the word equality because it'd have to be done manually, and anyway we're not the regulator, so it's not our job, even though it says in their objective 1 that we will assess the extent to which providers meet the relevant legal duties. So they can't, both of those answers can't be true. One of them's got to be wrong.
But we know, I mean, well, I won't say we. In my time, which is way back, I left in 2012, it was very easy to do a search of reports, because in fact I was doing that frequently to find out how much emphasis was being given to certain things. And also it's a critical thing when the big challenge is when you had a job like mine and Adrian's was the annual report, because actually you had to start doing all that sort of stuff to get a view as to what are the important things, because you'd read lots of them, but you'd have to investigate other aspects. And the only way you could do that is by doing word searches. So I can't understand why they're saying they don't have the technology now when they did have it in 2012.
Yes, and you and I probably could name the people who would do it for you.
Yeah.
And some of them are still there.
Still there. Yeah.
So they can't tell us what's in their deep dives because they don't collect that information, and they can't tell us what's in a report. So how do they know anything?
Just out of interest, because I was trying to search Ofsted reports by name of inspector, and I couldn't do that. Are they PDFs? I can't think now, or are they Word documents?
They are PDFs online.
So PDFs aren't searchable anyway.
No, but they will have those PDFs, or they would, because these were PDFs in my time, but
Right.
but even so, they would still be able to do that. And actually, you can overwrite the PDF function, can't you? You can still, there is software that's available that allows you to do that. So
Yeah, but you'd have to if you wanted to search, let's say, for I don't know, safeguarding in all reports, you'd have to do each report. You'd have to turn it back into a Word document, and so it wouldn't be any quicker.
yeah, but I mean, I all I know is that nothing appears to have changed from what was happening in 2012 to what's happening now, unless they've
I
stripped
think you
out
must
some.
be able to do it, Frank, because of those people who look for inspectors using the same phrases, aren't there?
Oh yeah, yeah, there is.
So
Yeah.
that must search the report
Yeah,
somehow.
yeah,
You know, we could do something useful with that and search for equality.
yeah. Wouldn't take long, would it?
Well, they could do all the deep dives. That would tell you that.
Yeah,
in
yeah,
minutes.
yeah. Well, you'd
Yeah.
hope somebody was doing this to, to make the annual report a really interesting bit of sort of academic research, to sort of offer a new insight into some of the findings from Ofsted reports. But don't hold your breath, anybody. I can't see that happening anytime soon.
No, the last one was remorselessly uninteresting, really.
Yeah, yeah. Stan, what's caught your eye this week?
Well, first of all, I wanted to say to Adrian, when he was trying to get his group to be called CIA, was it? You were trying to get. I was once in charge of a team that was curriculum support and innovation. CSI Chorley. That was my best title. But on Ofsted, what's caught my eye this week was reading the chief inspector's response to the tragedy of a head teacher committing suicide, and finding in it no real contrition, just a statement. But what in one point argues that yes, it's possible to argue against a one-word grade, and then in the same sentence virtually says that that's really useful to parents and to government. And I just felt that if she feels that one word is accurate compared to the rest of the report, she's not reading reports, or she's certainly not reading reports as a parent does, because I still think that the first two paragraphs where they talk about the delights of the school, even in schools that are inadequate, doesn't match the inadequate judgment that comes because something's wrong in leadership, or children potentially might not be safe. There's one I've read recently where children are safe, and then later on it says, but it's inadequate because of things that might mean that children are not safe.
Yeah. I mean, I thought that a little bit with the Caversham one, because I was trying to work out, because there's some references to behaviour at break times and supervision, and I couldn't really understand from the report, was there actually a problem, or was there a potential problem?
Yeah,
it wasn't clear to me.
No.
Well, two things I've read since then from people who are either at the school or involved with it. It was wet playtimes every day. It was 2 days of torrential rain. The inspection was in, and that two children had a set two in one of the classrooms during the communal time, and according to the inspector, it wasn't dealt with adequately.
Right. Yeah.
So that's like saying any school on any day could end up with inadequate.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we've tried to steer a little bit away from the detail of it, haven't we, really, over the last week or so? Because in a way, the reports don't tell you very much. Where you end up. I mean,
that's the
got
problem.
And that's the issue.
Yeah.
So you don't really get.
I mean, the issue is that it should, presumably, more detail will come out in later time. But I don't want to focus on that report. I've read recently quite a number of reports of schools where, still in my view, a technicality has caused problems with safeguarding and led to an inadequate judgment. And I don't feel it's like if we take an audit, if your audit is unsatisfactory, you're given a short amount of time, and it is short, to put it right. And then there's another statement to say, right, it's been done properly. I think that should be part of the process. If you correct something within 2 weeks, then, or before the report's published, it should say in the published report, these issues have now been solved.
Yeah. Well, I think about this, and you know, the technical bit about the safer recruitment is about compliance with regulations. Now, Ofsted said on the equalities issue that it's not the regulator.
Yeah.
But on this one, it's acting as the regulator,
Yes.
because there's a draconian reaction if you make a mistake on a recruitment check, for example. And I'm not condoning mistakes on recruitment checks, but it's
No,
confusing,
I agree with you.
you know, and that then has an impact on the quality of education. And as you say, it can be fixed within a few hours. It's not actually a problem. And what gets less attention is actually how effective are they at maintaining the safety of the children that they've got. So the child protection stuff. And really what I want to know in schools is, you know, where a child's been considered at risk, did the school notice?
Yes.
That's the thing that really matters in terms of their care of the children. And it'd be helpful if we could just put the regulation in a separate system somehow.
Yeah, because I find it very frustrating when we don't get to hear about how well the school is engaging with the local authority over these matters.
Yeah.
Because there are some where there are reviews held for pupils, and nobody's present from the school. And nobody follows that up. You know, for me, that is that to me is quite a serious weakness. But that's never really investigated. You know, the relationship between the school and the local authority used to be a key element of judgment making. You know, certainly in the sort of framework of 2003, 2005, those were key elements that gets little regard now. You know, so we end up with local authorities being inspected, you know, for that provision. And there's no, and there might be the odd visit to a school, but there isn't this alignment between, or investigation or examination of what schools are actually doing, you know, in terms of all the schools and their relationship with the local authority. You know, to me, that seems to be critically important. And and as schools are becoming now this sort of fourth emergency, you know, sort of mechanism, you know, that's critically important, isn't it? That relationship is really strong. And I know from my own experiences of the areas that I look at, that some are really, really in with the local authority and working really hard to make that work and to make the community safer, and there are others that giving it very little regard. Anyway, I'm going to finish.
There's a bit there, Frank, that, you know, the focus should be proportionate to the risk. Now, in the history of social care, which actually is a fascinating topic in itself, you know, the highest risk is that children die. Now, where do children die? Children die because nobody noticed what their problems were, usually at home. And therefore, what we need to really know is, are schools good at noticing? That's the absolute priority. And remember, there's the case in Coventry, I think, where the school failed to notice and the child died. That's really important, much more, really, as it must be said, than some of the minor technical checks that are required. Not to say that they're not essential, but where's the focus of attention?
Yeah. Well, we don't plan these discussions too much, but what's caught my eye this week, but it sort of fits in a little bit with this, is I've been a bit critical of the Children's Commissioner, Dame Janet de Souza, because I felt as though up to quite recently she's sort of been, I mean, the office that the Children's Commissioner's office has moved to the DFE building in London. I felt that was a really, really bad move. I wasn't involved, obviously, in that decision, but I can't understand why people can't see the potential problems that that presents in just the presentation of it. And so and also a few photos where the Children's Commissioner has had her photo taken with key trust leaders. You know, I find all of this just a little bit too close. But what I have to say is well done to the Children's Commissioner for speaking out about the current legislation they're trying to drive through with regard to the boats and the children on those boats, and actually saying that, you know, how it's grossly, you know, negligent of the part of government to try and ensure that children who come across the boats, who often don't know where they are actually going, there's the risk of trafficking as well, but they will be treated in exactly the same way as an adult, you know. So and what she's doing is calling this out, and I want to say well done to the Children's Commissioner for highlighting this, you know, this gross abuse of power in my eye. You know, in my eyes, I just feel as though it's wrong, and I'm pleased that she's standing up against the government's current sort of legislative program. So well done. I never thought I'd say that, but well done. Okay. Anything else we want to cover today?
I'm going to have to leave in a second, Frank.
That's
Sorry.
fine. And we're going to go. So before we do, Adrian, if there was one thing you could change in education, what would it be?
Oh dear. There's lots of tinkering that you can do. I think that's one of the issues. I think there's too much variation. We need we need to even up the bottom from the top a bit. A lot of the resources and attention go in particular areas, and we've got a distorted system. So if I go back to the endemic and epidemic, you know, I'm thinking about my local place that's got selective education. That inherently creates a problem for kids who are on the wrong side of that divide. And actually what we need most of all is to make sure that the quality is everybody's right, the same quality for everybody.
Well, I think we've got that.
I'll give you that, John. I think you're
we'll go along with that. Anyway, well, thanks everybody for watching, and thanks Adrian for joining us again. I'll be sending you another diary appointment for 2024. So it's fascinating having you on as a guest, and I look forward to seeing everybody next week. So take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.